And now, Houston Real Estate Radio.
Welcome back to Houston Real Estate Radio. Today I want to talk specifically to some landlords out there. I know that we have lots of landlords in the Houston market, and we even have a lot of people who want to be landlords. And I want to talk this segment about some things that you really need to know. Jesse Brewer joined us last weekend. He's joining us again this weekend. He wrote the book Tenants Uncommon. It's a great reading book. If you are thinking about becoming a landlord, it's a great book. Shares some great stories with you. Welcome back, Jesse. Glad you're Skyping in with us again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on.
So we have a lot of people in Houston that do rental properties, and some of them put them with apartment or with management companies, and some people, of course, rent them out on their own. You recommend using a property management company, is that right?
It depends on how big you are and what your situation is. I think if you're trying to work a full-time job or career, and once you crest over, say, 8 to 10 units and you want to keep that career, you need to really consider looking at a management firm.
You really have to think about what it takes to be a landlord, because there's a lot involved in it. People see the income stream from it, but they may not necessarily know what happens behind the scenes. There are a lot of things that you have to know about. What do you find is the main prompter for people wanting to be landlords? Is it the income stream? Is it the tax breaks? Do they just like real estate? What do you find most common?
Well, real estate's the American dream, right? Owning property is the American dream.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the favorite games in our country is Monopoly, which, is based on buying and owning property.
Right.
Accompany that with all the late night infomercials that makes it look so easy, how you can get into it, no money down, this and that and the other, creates a storm to where everyone can do it.
So what are the duties of a landlord? You talk about that in the book, in the beginning, talk about the different duties of a landlord. Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, a landlord's basically, you got to provide safe, clean, affordable housing for people, or you're not going to be in business. So your number one priority is to make sure your property is maintained and paid for. By paid for, making sure the taxes, the insurance, and the rent, and if you have a mortgage as a landlord, that your mortgage is paid. So those are to do that, you got to make sure certain things are put in place as far as your responsibility to make sure that you have a good tenant in there that's going to take care of the property, not destroy it and pay the bills, and that you maintain it as a landlord for the tenant to make sure they can pay their bills. Basically, customer service.
All right. So once you have that property, you've got the tenants in there, you're maintaining it, everything's being kept up. What are some other concerns that you see tenants have? Are there other concerns that have to be addressed? 3 months down the road.
There's things you can control and can't control. If you got bad neighbors, like if you own a multifamily apartment building, for example, you have an extra level of responsibility to make sure you don't place a bad tenant in unit 4B, because they're going to affect all the rest of your units as well. So you really got to look at how each placement is going to affect their neighbors. So when you can control that. Now, if you own a single family house and you have neighbors that are causing you problems, then you need to act as a diplomat to make sure you resolve those problems so that your tenants are happy and want to stay and pay their rent.
For those people that are out there collecting their own rent every month, they're not with a property management company, what would you advise them?
Well, if you could convince your tenants and train them to mail their rent in, that's the ideal situation. And with gas going upwards of $4 a gallon, run all over town is not going to be ideal. Number two, it's a safety issue, because if you're out there collecting cash and you have a half a dozen single family houses and you're collecting cash, you're setting yourself up for a potential to be a victim of a crime that you don't necessarily need to be.
Sure.
So I always recommend trying to be as creative as you can when collecting your rent. We let tenants pay with PayPal, credit cards. We let them mail us it in, do whatever they have to do to give them multiple ways to pay it. I try to avoid going to the property if I have to.
I liked one of the things you said in the book about giving them 12 pre-stamped envelopes in the beginning that are already addressed, so that they don't have to say, well, I couldn't get by the post office and get stamps. There's no excuse. Just put
Absolutely.
it in the envelope, put it in the mailbox.
Every time we do a new lease or lease renewal, we hand them 12 pre-addressed stamped envelopes, just as you said, so they can just drop it in the mail to us each month. I also give them a refrigerator magnet that goes right in the refrigerator with our office address and our phone number and the date the rent's due in case they lose the envelopes.
All right,
Because
that's a good idea.
Magnets.
Yeah. One of the things that becomes an issue for some landlords is when they have people constantly complaining. The same tenants have the same issues over and over and over. And you talk about in the book how there's a 90-10 rule. 90% of the tenants never give you a problem. You've got this 10% that are always the loudest and have the most problems. 10%
of your tenants take up 90% of your time. And we try to screen for that, and we've actually turned people away for that. If they seem very persistent or needy during the application process, it's a red flag for us. I mean, we can realistically turn an application around in 12 to 24 hours. We tell everybody 72 hours. And part of that process is seeing how aggressive they are towards us. If they're calling us 2 or 3 times each day, then it's a red flag. Either, hey, they're very needy, or, hey, they have a problem they're not telling us about. Because I always, not only we screening for the red flag in that issue, I'm kind of getting off topic, but we're also screening for if someone has to move right now, I want to know why.
Right.
Are they being evicted?
Maybe they got
being
evicted.
Forced out? A lot of landlords fall for that trap, especially new landlords.
They're just so excited to get somebody in quick.
I got cash in my hand, deposit and rent ready to go, and I always ask them, well, why did you not pay last month's rent?
Right. Yeah, you said in the book it's a red flag if somebody wants to pay 6 months ahead of time.
It is, unless it's tax return time. We do have folks at tax return time that get rather large tax return checks, and they don't know how to balance and budget their money, so they'll pay the rent up. But if someone calls me in July with that situation, then I wonder, well, who didn't they pay before?
Right. One thing that I've seen a lot of companies doing now on bills, credit card companies, lots of different companies, what they've started doing is saying, okay, this is the amount you owe, but if you pay past this date, this is the amount that you owe. And I've also seen the reverse of that. This is the amount you owe if you pay by this date, where it's almost like you're rewarded with a lower fee if you pay on time. Have you seen any of that kind of stuff with leases?
We do that. So, say rent's due on the 1st, but if you pay it before the 28th of the previous month, you get a $25 discount.
Okay. I like that. I mean, that's a good incentive for people to pay ahead.
Right. And very few actually do it, believe it or not.
Really? All right. So, and I would say that's probably because most people live paycheck to paycheck.
Yes.
And they
exactly
can't,
right.
All right. So the water, do you recommend that the water is included with the lease or not included with the lease?
Not included in the lease if you could avoid it. Now, if you have a multifamily building, there's a good chance the water has to be included because it's not metered separately. But if you have a situation where it's a single family house, make them pay their own water. And the reason being is if they're paying their own water and there's a toilet leak or a faucet leak or a toilet running, they're calling you to fix it.
Yeah.
If you're paying the water, they may let it run 2 months and say, oh, yeah, I forgot to call you. And you got a $500 bill waiting for you.
That's good to know. If you want to be a landlord, you really need to know that. That's good information. All right. If you suspect a problem with your tenant, what's the first thing to do?
As far as what type of problem are you talking about?
They're doing some sort of illegal activity. Neighbors are complaining about them. What's the first thing that you do?
I do a direct approach. I try to tactfully talk to them, and I'll give you a recent example. We had a tenant that was dealing some narcotics, and so we sent them a letter saying, it's been brought to our attention that you may be running some type of home-based business, and that's not licensed for that, so we're going to ask you to cease and desist all activity. Basically saying, I know you're dealing drugs, stop it. If that doesn't work, I'm a larger fella. I'll go knock on the door. And I can make it pretty intimidating if I need to. And I'll say something to the effect of, hey, we know what's going on. We don't like that activity here. Why don't you go ahead and pack your bags and get out? I'll give you 72 hours. If we're going to have any more problem, I'm going to call the law. And then I've gotten the police involved, but then I've even gotten more aggravating than that. I've stood outside an apartment building we took over. This was just this past summer. This isn't in the book. This is going to be in the next book, actually, Tenants Uncommon too. But I stood outside an apartment building we just took over, and there was a fella dealing some heroin out there. I'm pretty sure is what it was. So every time a car pulled up, when people were in it, I'd take their picture of my phone, and I walked around and took a picture of their car. And they asked what I was doing. I said, well, I'm collecting all these pictures for the police department so I can turn them over. And so after about 2 or 3 times doing that, people quit coming. And I basically shut his business down, and he moved because no business was coming there because he had a crazy hillbilly landlord taking everybody's picture.
Yeah, not everybody can do that. There are some tiny women out there who make great landlords.
I wouldn't recommend that approach for everybody. So, but it does work. Now, if you're a woman, maybe you got a business partner, a brother, or somebody could do that for you. It's definitely not conventional,
right?
But it worked. So
and you can really learn a lot about your tenants by talking to the neighbors.
Absolutely. Neighbors, especially chatty, old, elderly neighbors with nothing to do, love the gossip. You know, they say gossip's for high school teenagers. Adults gossip more than high schoolers I've ever seen in my life. It's ridiculous. And all you got to do is ask 1 or 2 questions, and they'll tell you everything.
Sometimes people have children that do damage to the property. What would you recommend to a landlord if they're seeing that sort of situation?
You know, if a tenant's child is damaging the property, ultimately the tenant is responsible for the actions of their child, and you hate to see that, but I mean, it's hard to do that. If the child's an adult child, then it's a little different ball game. You can tell the landlord, hey, you know, I understand Sally lives with you and she's 30 years old, but she can't keep damaging my property. She's got to go.
Yeah.
But if it is a minor child, unfortunately, and we've seen this before, we've had to evict tenants over that.
What about one of the things that TV has made so popular is the hoarding, you know, the hoarding shows. You've seen some of that. You've had tenants who are hoarders.
Oh, yeah, hoarders. And hoarders bring bed bugs, believe it or not. When you have hoarders, bed bugs usually seem to follow. So we're really strict about the hoarding situation. Not to mention the fact that if the hoarder, heaven forbid, they pass away, none of their family wants to deal with their stuff, I get to deal with it if it's in my property.
Wow. So how do you check on people to make sure they're not doing things like that? Are you going, do you have it in the lease where you can go a couple times a year to do maintenance checks?
Yeah, we do what I call a general condition report, and we do them twice a year on every unit. And we'll go in and we'll check for, make sure there's no running toilets, leaky faucets. And we do the maintenance stuff, but it also gives a check to see how they're treating the property. If there's a red flag, if they're stacking, newspapers 20 foot high, I got a problem here. They need to get them out because it's a fire hazard. And we usually blame the fire department. We'll always say, hey, this is a fire hazard. I could lose my license. I can shut it down. You got to get this cleaned up or get out.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Jesse Brewer, the author of Tenants Uncommon, and we'll be looking for Tenants Uncommon 2 to come out. Great stories in the book. If you're even thinking about being a landlord, if you are, of course, you need to read the book, but if you're even thinking about becoming a landlord, it's a great read. A lot of fun stories in there. We just touched on just a few of them, but there's a lot of great stories in there that are very interesting. Don't forget, you can join us on Facebook, and we can chat during the week about your real estate questions, or you can call us at 281-882-8088, and we'll be happy to answer your real estate questions on the air, or you can tweet your questions using hashtag HRER. Thanks for listening to Houston Real Estate Radio. We'll be right back.